All right. So there are a couple really solid polaris-cta implementations. So this is just one of them, but love the usage of CSS variables here, right? We see the scoping, right? So element name, don't necessarily need PSU white in this case, but I mean, you're saying that's the color name, which matches the design system that is being worked on. So that's great. Also love that you have this stuff mocked up correctly at the demo level and that you're leveraging the slot for each of these. It's great. So the really good thing about this implementation is it's as simple as possible, right? So the less code we write, the more correct it probably is. So in this case, there's outlined, and then based on throttling type, right? We see type can be light and outlined is re-leveraged in this. So the way that looks inside the element then is we've got these reflected. Now, because of the way the data model works and for cross-browser support, these also should be reflected. So I'd reflect those. We see there's a default margin on this, which is fine. It can be overridden. And then there's also these CSS variables for these different variations, which is a good idea. Now, just so people are aware, if you would set these variables up here, this will cascade through. So CSS variables do cascade through shadow roots. But if you're shipping this, right, like in a way that it's repurposable, and if I save, that all goes away. If I were to come up here and set these, see, they propagate through. Now, not a terrible idea to ship those CSS variables through there. We usually end up having like a whole class object that supplies that information, but that's outside of scope of what we were doing. So other little things, I would take stuff like this, like how we've got margin left here applied. And I basically go in and I'll inspect when I'm doing box model work, right? And I'll say, okay, so there's the link. The link is pushing things over to the left. And then we see how these boxes don't align appropriately. Now, this is the most simple element definition ever, and yet the boxes don't align. So the easiest way that I fix that is I say display block. And I start working on getting these to align appropriately, right? Because polaris-cta here is display block. If we take that margin off, see, so if we take that margin off, we do get pretty good alignment. Now, part of the issue here is that there is that margin left on the interior part of the tag. Like that doesn't make sense is what I'm trying to illustrate here. So if I were to take that margin left and I apply it up here, right now we've got the link looks there and the box model is in direct alignment. So it's a subtle thing, but if using these things over and over again in other systems, that box being in perfect alignment, see how these boxes nice mesh here so that you can see that the get the news and email correctly aligns with the edges of that box. That stuff is very important when you're building all of this stuff up into systems of systems. So excellent work here. Like I can do outlined, right? This is what we're talking about with state management, reflecting these values appropriately. I should be able to take filled off of there. So that's one case where there probably should be stuff that you want to account for people screwing up your API, basically, right? So if I just generically use this, see, this ends up getting bricked. So I take margin left, right, and I move that up into there. I'd also take this, and instead of linking display, I'd say display block, just so the box models align appropriately. Then let's see what else. I go down. You should have some default, but it shouldn't really be anything on these values that someone would see. And that way, someone goes to use the implementation correctly. Now, you're not leveraging slot correctly here, which is unfortunate. So the way we've been leveraging slot with text would be like this. That way, someone passes that value in, and they end up getting that. I'm actually marking that off right now. So tinted, right? We've got that slot in there, which would be why the design broke before. So without anything used here, right? We should have almost, we'll call it like a null case. And I'll usually make that my very first one. So it's fine if we have that because it matches the design, but let's go and take these values out. And we should still get something that looks correct-ish, right? So in this case, we've got no values leveraged and it defaults to something that I can actually go and see. Now, if I go and take tinted off, right, that's sort of what we saw before where I said typed in nothing and we lose that entirely. So one way of resolving that could be, we've got type primary. Let's make a type. All right. And what this is saying is if type has any value, then do this other stuff. Now, this isn't going to affect the ones we have because everything cascading down from here is a more specific selector. However, if someone were to screw up and implement this improperly, right, and just write the word type or type df or type stuff, right, someone screws this up, it still looks generally correct. Right now, we're getting into sort of DX or developer experience, the way someone would use something. If someone were to screw up our API, thinking of this as an API, we still want it to work. Now, it might not be the thing that exactly they anticipated, but it shouldn't break the design entirely. So that's one way of accommodating those. Some other things in here, if you see values you're repeating over and over again, there's an easier way to do it. So with this, if I move this stuff up to the link itself, it's going to apply, and then I can refactor and remove that everywhere else. Right, so my initial refactor there is get rid of the padding and transition. See, the padding is the same everywhere. If you're leveraging a property over and over again, or sorry, an attribute in this case, if you're leveraging an attribute over and over again, that probably suggests that there's something lower than that you can apply. So another little thing, and you might see this, we call this flash of unstyled content. So if I save, it's not actually save. If I save this file, see how it goes to subscribe. So this is a huge common critique of web components, to be perfectly honest. One way of helping to rectify that somewhat is up in your template. We almost have like this is what to do when nothing has been applied. So if I say not defined, see the difference there? It's already applied the correct spacing within reason. Actually, it hasn't. Let's get that margin left on there. Let's do margin left. There we go. So now you still have a flash of unstyled content in this case. So then I can take these defaults, right? And I can apply them directly to the tag. And now we're getting the color shifting, obviously. And there's other ways that you can even go and attack that, right? I could go and say, if not defined, and we've got like literally every option there. But even with this small difference here where I've added this code to the demo in this case, this is going to get me higher scores on Google page speed metrics. Because when anyone goes to use this, it's going to visually be in the right place. Now, yes, there's going to be this flash, right, where it updates. You might not even see that when you're actually downloading the entire application. But little things like that can help us get solid SEO scores and user perception of quality with minimal change here, right? It's almost like here's the stuff that's the default. But imagine this stuff doesn't actually apply until this file has loaded. So some additional ways I would refactor this. We see there's like color and type A, right? And then we say on type A, we're going to set these values, right? And it's all well and good when we have these values, but there's another way that we could do this so that we're not writing these over and over again. And it's through another form of abstraction, if you will. So I'm going to take the link, and it's super generic, right? And I'm going to say color is going to be blue by default. Now it's going to just flip over. That's great. Right, but now with that null case, if I do this, I still get the same thing. And then instead what I'm going to do is, this is not going to be that. It's going to be polaris-cta color. And then I'm going to take border and background. All right. Now, border in this case, honestly, I'd probably have like var polaris-cta border width, comma, 2 pixels. Right? And instead of blue here, I'm going to say CTA border color. And then background color, similarly, I'm going to say background color. Right? And at first, it doesn't do anything. But now I should be able to just set these values based on what these conditions match without setting all the attributes associated. So let me show you what I mean. So now I can say polaris-cta color and say color is equal to that. And if we see in the original here, I'm actually setting blue and blue, which implies that color is actually the same as the border color in this case. And if I go and look through, sometimes border and background color change. So I do need 3 parameters here. But I can do CTA color, set that to blue, and then I can do background color, set that to white, and then I can do refactor. There we go. I can do border hyphen color, and the border color is okay. So now when I save, again, I still get the same net effect, but now when I go to write all of these, I'm just setting CSS variables. I'm not setting parameters every single time. So it's already less code. So I got blue, white, blue. Now I can delete this. Then I go into the focus states, right? And I say blue, blue, white. All right, and we'll end up with the same net effect, but it's way easier to trace. It's way easier to just manipulate the design and have it apply successfully to all of the cases. This one's blue, blue, white. This one is on focus state. This one's going to be blue, white, blue. Okay, then for our tinted case, we get a little funky here. We go white, dark gray, light blue. All right, and I can refresh and see that I'm still hitting these cases. I should still end up with the same exact thing. So I'm going to apply this one. We've got white, dark blue, light blue is in place. And paste all of these guys in. But I've already got less code than I previously had written. Dark blue, light blue. Okay, that one's good. This one's going to be, whoops. So we get light blue, dark blue. And if I'm working with a design team on this, it's also a lot more transparent now. Like if I've implemented the design incorrectly, right, it still works exactly the same. But now I've taken out all of those aspects that were variation. So now, oh, shoot, the design team says it's actually a 4-pixel border. All of them get it simultaneously, right? So we're relating this back to singular values. I could, just for readability's sake, I could do like border width and then make border width this, all right? And then we say border hyphen style, and that's going to be var polaris-cta border style. And the default for that is solid. And then we're going to say border hyphen color. And the default color is not something we're going to set actually in here, because what we could start to do is even take out our defaults. So we can say, oh, well, instead of this null case here, right, let's get rid of that. And we'll just put those values up here now. So now we have a default border color. It's applied to the whole element. If nothing is set, the border color, the background color, and the color are going to be set to these values. And so by doing that, then I can start to abstract these other things. I can say, well, the default width of this is 2 pixels. And then I can get rid of my default there. And I can say the default styling of this is solid. And then I can get rid of my default there. And now we're abstracting. The other nice thing, just visually from a developer experience perspective, we're taking this and we're sort of stepping through and saying, okay, I'm going to restructure this a little bit. The last thing we do is render this element. And the element's render is excessively small, right? But all right, let's space that over. Whoops. All right, so it's indented appropriately. It says it's a CTA, okay, and then I can go up and collapse the styles. So usually the way that I structure these elements is something like this. So I'll do static get tag. This is a convention that I use everywhere. It's not the standard. You don't have to have done it. You didn't do anything wrong by not doing it. I'll do it like this. That way, if I needed access to that tag name, or I could just change it, right? So as you work with more and more of these components and they're built in the exact same way, it gets easier and easier to just dig in and find the thing that you need to tune or work with the design team to modify and optimize your time downstream, right? So another thing I'll do is I'll set the defaults of these, of all of them in this case, right? And then I'll align these with the way that they're presented here. So to me, this is text, although usually we don't want to use text. We're going to use a slot, but it's fine to have that fallback capability, right? Text, link, type is tinted, which means that this dot outlined is false and this dot filled is false, just so we're 100% clear that that's what those are, right? So then I'll step down through to general good convention, have a space there just for funsies, and then I get into the CSS. So if we now, looking at this file, if we have any issue as far as the functionality, things that we need to add, it's in one line. If it's the CSS and the styling of it, it's in one block. Now, I could go in here, and again, I've commented on this, using rems here is a little weird. To refactor away from rems, you just like multiply this value by 16. So like if I was to take 0.025 times 16, right, we get 0.4, and 0.4 px letter spacing is a little weird, but it's fine, right? So we've got border radius on this link. I would go and then abstract that. All right, so anything that is potentially variable with this design, I want someone to be able to override, knowing that they're not going to. Now, this does get into some of the politics of design, if you will. Like by setting these variables, I'm making a political choice that someone could override this. By not supplying these variables, I'm making the political choice that you cannot change the font weight on this. And that may seem silly, but if there's anything in the design that needs modified in this way, and you're blocking it now, this is a possible barrier to people adopting it. For example, let's say that we have polaris-cta and the transition property is not set. So with 0.1s. Let's say that we're in an application where this is being used, where the transition state across everything in the application is visually 0.3 seconds. This is actually really common. So that, now it might not seem like a big deal. I'll be totally honest, right? That binds quickly. But let's say that you had something that was 0.6. So you get that nice fade. And if you don't have that consistent fade and transition of values across the entire application, some things end up feeling like they're super blinky, while other things have this nice bloom of slowly enveloping and becoming what the thing is. Generally speaking, we set these to 0.3 seconds or 300 milliseconds. And the reason is because it takes about 300 milliseconds for someone on a touch device to initiate a tap event and distinguish the difference between a tap event and a click, air quotes. So again, obsessive level of detail there. But again, also generally I put those at the top. Now things like this you might not want, right? I don't want someone to override text decoration. That is going to abuse what the intention of this is, right? Like design wise, we don't want it to be underlined. It's a button. So you don't do it with setting this for everything for sure. But hopefully this was a interesting exercise. As far as refactoring here, like padding might be set in stone, right? That might just be visually the way that we want that padding applied. Also, I'll generally group these values so that we have kind of your things that the user can't modify, and then downstream of that, the things that your user can modify. Making it really verbose like this with border, hyphen, and all of them, you could just get away with doing like this. Now, you're giving a lot of flexibility there. So it's possible that the border width is not something people can set. Perhaps that's 2 pixels hard-coded, but yet the color and the background can be set. There's also ways of cascading this so that you hard code these CSS variables so that people can't override them necessarily, right? You hard code the default, for example, of what polaris-cta border color is. And at another level, eventually you just sort of hope people do the right thing. So this is fantastic, this implementation. I'm just kind of doing some icing on the cake stuff here, right? So you can see it supports tinted, it supports light outlined, it has the focus and hover states of these. You could also do, some people did active like this. So that is when you actually click on the tag in question. You could also do something like this. So I hover, it does that, but when I go to click, it would initiate something different. But that was not amongst the requirements. Aligning focus and hover state, I think is perfectly fine. You could want to potentially say, okay, A hover, A focus, and do something at this level just when we're focused and hover. And one of those things would be outline. So outline is, let's do red 4 pixels solid. Outline is what's presented there. You see it show up. And obviously we wouldn't make that red. But outline shows up typically when we focus, but not when we hover. And so if you really wanted to ensure that that value was also in alignment, right, I could take outline, and I wouldn't do it on A because I don't want to give an outline. If I give an outline here, 2 pixels solid red, we'll see. Right, there's always going to be an outline. We don't want that to always be there. So outline would be only on focal state, and we would make that be aligned most likely with what the border color is right there. All right, and then we might say, okay, it's 2 pixels. All right, so you do see the outline there, but it's minimal. And then another thing you can do is you could say outline hyphen offset, and you could actually say -2 pixels. And you're not even seeing what's happening, but that's by design. It's actually it's overlaying the outline directly on top of where the focus is. Like if I make this 20 pixels, you'll see, right? So see how it makes this giant box outside of it. And because we have transition set for everything, when you do transition and you don't define a property, right? So transition is just, what is this, 0.3. You could say all e's hyphen in hyphen out. And you get a different transition state. But also, I could just say that the only thing that transitions is background hyphen color. And see the background color shifts, but the text color is instantaneous. And I'm not getting that same transition on the outline. So generally, I would make those, do the same linear transition. Or, well, let's do linear instead of using it out. There we go. All right, so linear, you get this just like pulse, versus ease in, ease out. It has a little bit of a delay to it. It's very subtle, for sure. Now, I wouldn't animate the outline, but in this case, I might have the offset, and I do the offset as the same width as that. And you could actually composite these values together, right? So I could say like that. And the reason that I would do this, and I would align style with outline as well. The reason I do this is that the browsers all have their own default. There we go. All right, and so this is now the offset width. I think you can do math here. Let's see. Maybe not. Calc. Maybe like calc. Take the border width times -1, right? Because we want the inverse of what it is. There we go. And so by doing that, I could just say that there is no outline, right? That's another solution to this. None. Right. So now, there we go. Even more simplified. There's no outline on it. I do have to put that on the focus state. But now we have an exact uniform alignment of hover with focus. Now, some people don't like to do it that way from an accessibility standpoint. And they wouldn't do this offset either. If anything, they might have an offset set to the width on purpose, or do a calculation that it's the width and it's not -1. It might be like ×2. And then we do the same with the width here. Okay, and then we might say like border or outline. Oops, outline. Oh, there is no outline radius. How about that? So I can't set the radius of that. It's just because of the border. So, all right. And the reason I might do this, and I might not do it in that color. I might hard code that to something, is so that the screen reader or someone using a keyboard visually gets this additional enhancement as far as what it is they're selecting. So I'm going to set that just back to none for total alignment. But I'll push this up. This is a very solid implementation, some really solid implementations in this space. But a lot of good stuff to consider here. And to me, this would be kind of like what I would personally roll out if I was to do this.